What's going on, guys? Blunt Cuts here. This is a Watch Your Realms video. Thanks so much for tuning into my channel. I always appreciate it. I am going to be going over CASSIEL's damage today. I've done some testing, compared him to WUKONG and KIGIRI in Nightmare 4 Guild Boss. I'm also going to try to provide a little bit of perspective as far as his burst damage in Abyss 1 as it does pertain to breaking the physical damage shield there. There has been some talk about how he might compare to WUKONG and KIGIRI and the other premier physical damage dealing fighters in the game that are really excelling in that content right now. And I want to talk about whether or not he's somebody whose name should be mentioned in that group or not. But before we get to that, I do want to talk about how one of CASSIEL's resources, the Divine Sigil, how that does function and how that impacts his ultimate usage, because it's something that I've seen a lot of folks be kind of confused about. So I want to cover that before we get into the numbers. Let's go take a look at his skills. So Divine Sigil is a resource that he does generate himself. It can stack up to 3 times. Each stack will give him 20% ultimate damage. On top of that, when he does consume a stack, it's going to give him 50% rage. He also has a passive, which is going to further increase that rage gain, which I will get to in a second. But suffice it to say, for CASSIEL, stacking up Divine Sigil is incredibly important for maximizing his damage. He will regenerate 1 Divine Sigil every 60 seconds. However, for every unit that is adjacent to him, so in other words, that is within 1 tile of him, he is going to get a 30% increase to that rate of regeneration. Essentially, this means that when he has 3 units in range of him, which is when it caps out, his Divine Sigil regeneration will max out at once every 30 seconds, a little bit over 30 seconds. I think it's more like 32 seconds, but it's a pretty significant increase to his sigil regeneration. On top of that, when he does have a unit in front of him and they take damage, every instance of damage is going to reduce the next Divine Sigil's recharge time by 5 seconds. So you get it 5 seconds sooner for every instance of damage that the unit that is directly in front of him does take. This Celerity of Mind passive essentially enables him to use his ultimate back to back to back to back over and over again. You may have seen that in some other videos. I do want to touch on that here because, like I said, Divine Sigil does restore 50% of his rage when it is used. As you can see in the ultimate here, consumes 1 stack of Divine Sigil and restores 50% rage. The Celerity of Mind passive increases that rage gain by another 50%, which does mean that you will gain a 100% rage increase every time you consume 1 stack of Divine Sigil. That's why you will see CASSIEL using his ultimate up to 4 times in a row. It's pretty staggering what he can do because all of his damage comes from the ultimate, which ignores defense, which is just a big, massive hitting ultimate. It's an auto ultimate, unfortunately. He's kind of a contradiction. I think he is a burst damage specialist, but you can't control when he does his burst because it's an auto ultimate. So it's like a weird contradiction. On top of that, he is a single target fighter who also helps to absorb the damage of the unit in front of it. He's a weird hero, but he does do a pretty significant amount of damage. The question really is how much damage. And so let's go take a look at the team that I did use when I did the run. All right, so here are the teams that I did use. We've got Toreador as the Nightmare Lord here. He is buffing KIGIRI as well as WUKONG, who are the units I'm going to be comparing CASSIEL to. I did, when I did my testing, drop in both Toreador and Volca in order to maximize the Nightmare unit speed bonus for both WUKONG and for KIGIRI. On the other side, for CASSIEL, I do have Praetus in there as the Lord. Both of these Lords, Toreador and Praetus, were A5 at the time, so all these units are going to be benefiting from the bonus that these respective factions do get from the A2 Lord Awakening. Another note, CASSIEL, most of his damage does come from the ultimate, and I tried to make sure that every single time CASSIEL was about to cast his ultimate that I used the Praetus Hammer, the Lightning, in order to buff CASSIEL's damage. Arbiters do get a 50% damage buff every single time that Lightning is thrown out. The duration of that buff is dependent on how many stacks of the Lightning there are at the time of use, but CASSIEL works through his ultimate very, very quickly, so even when there was only 1 stack of Lightning, that 8-second duration should have been enough to cover all of his ultimate uses, even though he uses them back to back to back. Before I do get to the run, I am obligated to let you know about Smile One. Smile One is the official third-party payment platform for Watcher of Realms. To the right of me on the screen, I do have top-up rewards if you do make a purchase on Smile One. Depending on the amount that you purchase, you will get some of these rewards. I want to make it clear, I am not recommending that anybody spend right now. I don't think it's a good time to spend. I think there's been a lot of things going on in the game, which to me make it questionable about whether or not you should be spending on this game. With that said, I also know that many of you are going to spend anyway. So if you are interested in spending, I recommend that you follow my Smile One link that is in the description of this video. It will give you a discount on your W Gold purchase. On top of that, it's another way that you can support my channel. Every time you purchase W Gold using that link, it does benefit me. And if you do purchase W Gold between now and June 9th, you will be eligible to receive some of the top-up rewards that are in the table to the right of me right now. Let's go take a look at this boss run. All right, I got the numbers up on the screen right now. I do hope you enjoyed that boss run. I'm just going to walk you through the sheet relatively quickly here. A couple notes before I do talk about the numbers. After the A0 section, every successive awakening, there is a delta row that does represent the percent damage gained going from the previous awakening to the current awakening. So, for example, the delta row in the A1 section does indicate the percent damage gained going from A0 to A1. Etc., etc., etc. I've also highlighted the top damage at each of these awakening levels in green. The percent of top damage row is showing the percent of the top damage for each awakening level that the other units did do. Starting with A0, Wukong was the top damage, doing 133 million damage. KIGIRI, by contrast, did 91 million damage, about 68% of Wukong's damage. CASSIEL, this is his strongest awakening. You're going to notice a trend. He starts out strong at A0, and then he does less and less as time does go on. He did 98 million damage, which was 74% of Wukong's damage. Moving on to A1, Wukong gained about 4% damage. I think this is just RNG because his A1 does not actually benefit him at all. 138,814 damage, still number one at that point. KIGIRI, again RNG here, but did lose 1.26% damage. Should have gained a little bit, but his A1 is pretty subpar. CASSIEL doesn't really gain much damage on the A1 either. It does give him some initial burst damage when he is deployed, but doesn't really give him a lot of damage in a long boss fight like this. So he gained only 0.1% damage. Again, I think this is some RNG at play. He should gain a little bit more than that, more than likely, but that did put him at 71.26% of Wukong's damage. But we do see that gulf widen as these awakenings do increase, especially because KIGIRI takes over as the top damage dealer at A3. A3 plus KIGIRI is a different beast. He starts doing a lot more damage. He did 190 million damage, a 112% increase going from A1 to A3 for KIGIRI. Wukong, on the other hand, 168 million, 21% increase going from A1 to A3. He did 88% of KIGIRI's damage. CASSIEL, 130 million damage, which is very respectable. This is the biggest jump for CASSIEL, awakening over awakening. Going from A1 to A3 was a 31.79% boost. Now it's interesting, the A3 for CASSIEL is a 25% increase to CASSIEL's single target damage during his ultimate. I would think that that just meant that those strikes were increased by 25%, the damage output. But clearly, he's doing more than that here. And I tested this a number of times. I got similar results every single time. It does seem to be about a 30% increase going from A1 to A3. I guess you could argue that the additional attack he does gain in the A2 might be influencing this as well, but I wouldn't think that would give him a full other 5% damage. But maybe I am wrong about this. I guess maybe 5% from the attack, another 25% from the ultimate damage. However, despite that, he is still doing less damage proportionally than he was at the previous awakening levels, dropping down to 68.34% of KIGIRI's A3 damage. Moving on to A5, Wukong reclaims his top spot. I think based on what I've seen in the past, this could flip-flop either way. But using this comp and on this specific run, Wukong did come out slightly ahead at 252 million damage. He had a 50% increase going from A3 to A5. KIGIRI did gain 27% damage, almost 28% damage going from A3 to A5. 243 million damage for him. CASSIEL, on the other hand, 142 million, just a 9% gain there, which honestly I think is good RNG for CASSIEL. I think this could have been a lot worse. He doesn't actually gain any damage on the A5, and the only damage he does gain going from A3 to A5 is on the A4, which is 8% penetration. But because he gained so much less than the other two units, he fell in at 56.24% of Wukong's damage. He would have been a little bit closer to 60% of KIGIRI's damage, but either way, when maxed out, CASSIEL is not going to be comparing to either Wukong or KIGIRI as far as damage output is concerned. However, he will do pretty significant burst damage. But before I get to that, I want to point your attention to this table that I do have that's above my head on the screen right now. I have listed out all of the gear as well as the stats that each of these heroes did have when I did this testing, so you can go and you can check that. Tried to make it as close as possible. I did have Wukong and KIGIRI in their exclusives at level 25. CASSIEL was in a level 25 Shattered Hilt, the relatively new single target fighter artifact. Who knows? Maybe at some point CASSIEL does get an exclusive. It does increase his damage, bring him closer to one of these heroes, but it would have to be a hell of an exclusive, no doubt about it. Let's go talk about these units' burst damage, because that is particularly relevant to whether or not CASSIEL can function as a shield buster in Abyss 1. So at the bottom of the sheet, I do have this table broken out, and these numbers are approximate. I went into Abyss 1, and I tried to get an idea of how much damage each of these units did do with their initial ultimate hits. Couple of qualifiers about that. Both Wukong and KIGIRI do increased damage after their ultimate is used. Wukong gets defense ignore for 60%, I believe, he's defense ignore for I think 12 or 15 seconds after he uses his ultimate. KIGIRI does get an attack boost after he successfully parries. On top of that, his exclusive artifact does give him increased damage for I believe 15 or 20 seconds against all units that are hit by his Ember Strike. CASSIEL's damage is all wrapped up in his ultimate. So while both Wukong and KIGIRI will have a window where they're doing increased damage immediately after they inflict this much damage, CASSIEL will not. So this table can be a little bit deceptive, but I did my best to try to isolate exactly how much damage CASSIEL would be doing per ultimate to get an idea of how effectively he might be able to break down the shield. Now, if we were able to use Praetus in there, then he would be doing about 9 million damage, and that's assuming he uses his ultimate 3 times in a row, which is pretty typical based on what I did see. So he does approximately 3 million damage each time. This is with the Praetus buff as well as the Praetus benefit. With no Lord, he was doing about 6 million damage. Now, the interesting thing is, you would think that the extra stats that he did get from Praetus would bump his damage up more. That wasn't what I observed. Again, these numbers are approximate. I did my best based on the damage meter, so I'm just reporting the data to you. I'm not sure what other factors may be influencing this, but I did see around 6 million damage when he had no Lord. And of course, like I said, this is not counting the subsequent damage they would do after they get that initial hit on their ultimate. And even considering that, CASSIEL still was doing less damage than KIGIRI and only slightly more than Wukong, even when he did have a Lord. So ultimately, I don't think that this is somebody that you are going to be able to bring into Abyss 1. Really not a great showing for CASSIEL at the end of the day. I don't think that you're going to be able to bring him in and expect to reliably do a bunch of damage to the shield, even if Northerners suddenly become an amazing boss-killing faction. There would have to be something else that would happen to change the way that this works. Because right now, I don't think he's doing anything that you couldn't get from bringing in a different physical damage dealer. Solid damage, solid burst for sure. But again, like I said in the intro, you can't really control it because it is an auto ultimate, and that is going to be exceptionally limiting for him. What I did observe when I was running these tests is that it is possible to have him use the ultimate immediately before the shield does come out, and then you don't get the ultimate back up until right before the shield does expire, which does not give him enough time to churn through 3 different ultimates and get his burst damage out. And because you can't control it, you can't control the burst, even though that is kind of his specialty. It's a wonky kind of kit. Again, doesn't make him a bad hero, but I don't think it makes him appropriate for this particular content. I don't want to make it seem like I am down on this hero. I do think he's a good hero. He does a lot of damage. He just doesn't really compare to the best fighters in the game. And I think there has been some talk about him being similar to Wukong's damage. I know Destin put out a video. Don't get it twisted. I'm not knocking Destin. I think everything that he did in that video, I did watch it, is is fine and correct. I do think there's a couple things to consider when you're comparing A5 Wukong to A0 CASSIEL in that situation, though. I'd say principally being that because of the auto ultimate, CASSIEL is just using his ultimate as much as he possibly can, which can be good and bad. It's going to increase his overall damage, but it does mean, like I was saying a second ago, that he might not use his burst damage on the shield in the most effective way. Wukong, you probably could get more damage out of him if you weren't sitting on his ultimate, trying to make sure you did use it when the shield was up, because taking down the shield is the #1 priority in that boss. If you don't do that, you can't progress. The other thing that is really going to be limiting to CASSIEL is, like I've been talking about, his factions just do not align here. You can't really use Northerners or Arbiters in Abyss 1 if you do want to have a shot at hitting the 60k chest. Certainly, I think probably the 35k chest as well would be out of reach if you were using either one of those factions. And when Destin did get close to that damage, he did have CASSIEL in there with Praetus as the Lord. But when he switched out Praetus and used CASSIEL off faction, the numbers decreased drastically. And so I just don't think he's viable. I do think in single target arena, probably as an Arbiter, but potentially as a Northerner as well, he could be really, really strong. He does get back to his ultimate very quickly. He ignores all defense during his ultimate, and he does a lot of burst damage, which I think will help him churn through the individual spawns in that content. On top of that, when there isn't a unit for him to attack, he also is getting a significant increase to his rage regen, which is really, really nice. I think that comes at A1, I believe. I think he's set up to really be impactful in that content. So with all that said, I do like the hero, and I do think he's good. I think he fills a role in the Arbiter faction that we didn't previously have. The only other single target-ish fighter that we do have in the Arbiters is Jira, and Jira's got this kind of wonky kit. She doesn't do a lot of sustained damage. CASSIEL will do a lot of sustained damage, does do solid boss damage, and that's something that we just didn't have in the Arbiters before. And I think he will fit that niche, so I think he's definitely worth having. Unfortunately, he is paired alongside Aracha right now in this banner, and I don't think he's worth going for. He certainly doesn't do enough. He's not going to be account changing in any way that you want to take that risk. So I would hold off on that, as I did say in my Should You Summon video that I did have out a couple days ago. But in any case, I did want to get out this video before the banner did release. I'm sorry it's so late. I got a lot going on right now in my life, and it's hard to be diligent with everything. I do hope that this helps inform some of you as you are trying to decide whether or not you should summon. But personally, my recommendation, I think you should hold off. But if you do summon him at some point randomly in the future, be happy about it, because even at A0, he's a pretty solid hero, and he's a lot of fun. He's a lot of fun. Does a lot of damage in a short time period. So appreciate you all tuning in. Please do take a second before you go, click that thumbs up button and like the video, increase its visibility so more people do get their eyes on this data. And if you are interested in seeing my stuff going forward, click that subscribe button so you are notified when I do release new videos. But otherwise, guys, good luck if you are summoning, and I will catch you all next time.